How you doing there? Welcome back to Babylon Talmud. Today we're studying Daf Daled, Daf 4 of Masechta BavaBasra. Friends, your friends. Alright, yeah, okay. Daf Daled. Alright, sounds good to me. Yeah, whatever, it's a good daf. Alright, we're going to wrap up the first Mishnah of BavaBasra. We're going to also do the second Mishnah of BavaBasra, and it's going to be great. Okay. We're going to start in Daf Daled Amud Aleph. We did quite a bit yesterday. So we're actually almost even kind of towards the bottom, about 2/3 of the way through Daf Daled Amud Aleph, because we had that whole long story of Herod, which was fascinating, I think. And, alright, so we're at the 2 dots, about, 15, 20 lines from the bottom of Daled Amud Aleph. Akol Kaminig HaMedina, so we said, that it was Gvil and Gozis and Leveina, all sorts of different things. So Akol Kaminig HaMedina, everything is like the Minig HaMedina. Akol Asuye Mai, when it says Akol, everything, to include what? Even if the minig is to use, palm fronds, whatever the minig might be to use to make walls, so that works as well. So we said, and now, so they divide up the wall in half, right? They each contribute equal amounts of the chotzer for construction of the wall. And if it falls down, so the place where the wall stood as well as the stones are divided equally between the two. So pshita, this is obvious. Lo tzricha dinafal shusa dechad minayu. Well, we're talking about a scenario where the wall fell into one of their domains, the domain of either Reuven or Shimon. Inami depaninu chad l'shusa didei, or one of them moved the stones to his part of the chotzer. So maybe then, if that's the case, the other one should have to prove that he has the rights to half of the wall. So kamash milan, no, memele, they just divide it in half regardless of where the stones might be right now. They both have equal rights to that wall, and if it falls down, regardless of where the stones end up, they each can get equal parts. V'chein begina makom shenagu ligdor mechayven also. Alright, so then we said, and similarly in a garden, where the minig is to put up a wall in the middle, so they do that. Hagufa kasha. Okay, so the Mishnah had mentioned two scenarios right next to each other. So first, of course, we talked about the chotzer, right? That's the opening act of Masechta BavaBasra. But then we talked about a garden, and we talked about a valley. And the way that we talk about the garden and the valley leaves us with some questions. And here they are. Hagufa kasha, this is inherently contradictory. What is? On the one hand, Omart, you said, V'chein begina. And on the one hand, we said, and similarly by a garden. If it's makom shenagu ligdor mechayven also. So if the minig in that place where the garden is to put up a fence, so then neither one can object. If one of them wants to put up the fence, the other one has to do it oichet. But again, we said makom shenagu ligdor mechayven also. That is if it's the minig to put up a fence. Hastama, but by default, ein mechayven also. By default, we would not require. If Shimon wants to make the fence, we would not require Reuven to put up the fence by default. But ema seifa. But then we say aval bika. But in a valley, makom shenagu shelo ligdor. If the minig is not to make a wall in, I guess, the property that they jointly own in a valley, ein mechayven also. So if the minig is not to make a wall, so we don't require them to make a wall. Hastama, but by default, mechayven also. There would be a chiyuv to make a wall, right? We're saying if the minig in the valley is dafka not to make a wall, so you don't have to make a wall. But by default, they would make a wall. But this doesn't make sense because ashta stam gino omart lo stam bika miboyo. Here's the thing. The whole point of the wall is because of hezek re'iyah, is because of privacy. A garden is a private area. it makes sense that privacy would be a priority in a garden. A valley is an open area, a less private area, a public area. So there would be less of a need for privacy. So we're saying this doesn't make sense. On the one hand, we're saying when it comes to a garden, which is inherently a more private area, if the minig is to make a wall, so then they put up a wall. But by default, even though it's a private area, they wouldn't have to put up the wall for privacy. And then you're saying that in a valley, if the minig is not to make a wall, they don't have to put up a wall. But by default, you would put up a wall in a valley? You're telling me that in a garden, you wouldn't have to put up a wall because of Ezekriya, but in a valley, by default, you would put up a wall? This doesn't make any sense. So Amar Abai says, Abai Achikama, this is what the Mishnah is saying, V'chein stam gina, period. And similarly, a garden, right? Just like we said earlier, that by a chotzer, you would put up a wall. So also by a garden you would put up a wall for privacy. And in terms of valleys, if the minig is to make a wall in the valley, so they make a wall in the valley oichit. But by default, you wouldn't make a wall in the valley, but you would make a wall in a garden, in a chotzer. Rava says, Imkain, my aval. Rashi actually adds what I think is an important word. Rashi says, Imkain, ma aval bebika. Right, meaning, what does it mean, aval bebika? Aval bebika, but in a valley, implies that up until now we're not talking about the valley, right? Meaning, according to Abaye, he's saying, v'chein stam gina, uv'makom shnagu ligdor babika. But it says, aval babika, which means that it's not one flow, right? We're saying, makom shnagu ligdor, and then in a bika, we're talking about makom shelo nagu ligdor. So it's two separate things, right? Abaye would have you read it kind of as one kind of, right, Abai would have you read it as b'makom shnagu ligdor bebika. But the thing is, Rava points out is that no, there's an aval bebika after that, and it says aval bebika makom shnagu shelo ligdor. So Rava basically says that he doesn't agree with Abai's reading of the Mishnah. To him, he says it just doesn't make sense. Imke my aval elo Rava rather says Rav Achi Katani. This is prat in the Mishnah. V'chein, and similarly, stam gina we treat, and just like a chotzer, right? You have to put up a wall. So v'chein stam gina, and similarly a garden by default. Kimakum shenagu ligdor dami. By default, we would treat a garden as a makum shenagu ligdor, in a place where the minig is to put up a wall for privacy, also, and you would have to put up a wall. If Shimon wants to put up a wall, Reuven can't disagree. Aval stam biko kimakum shnagu shelo dami ve'mechayvin also. But by default, a valley, on the other hand, would be considered a place where the minig is not to make a wall, and therefore you don't have to make a wall. All right. So according to Rava, we're saying that in a garden, by default, you would make a wall for privacy because a garden is a more private area, and in a valley, by default, you would not have to make a wall for privacy. Gewaldig. Okay. So we said that in a valley, so by default, you would not have to make a wall in the valley for privacy. But what if Shimon wants to make a wall? So he can't compel Reuven. He can't force Reuven to make that wall because it's a valley. We're saying by default there's no chiyuv to make a wall, so he can't compel Reuven, but he wants a wall. He wants privacy, so he can make a wall in his own area, in his own part, right? So we said Elem Ratza, if Shimon wants to nonetheless make a wall, so he can make the wall on his part of the property, and he makes a chazis. He makes some kind of a sign on the outside of the wall to show that that this is his wall on his property. My chazis, what is this sign, this visual indicator that he makes? Ravuna says, achpele lekarna levar. What he does is, at the top of the wall, so he builds the wall entirely in his portion of the property, and at the top of the wall he builds some kind of like arch, like I guess a small arch, that arches towards Reuven's property, right? Shimon at the top of the wall would make an arch on the side of the wall that's closer to Reuven's part of the property, and the arch would arch towards Reuven's part of the property. V'navid miligov, why not make the arch on Shimon's own side of the wall, arching towards his property, and that would be the sign that it's his wall. Ovid chave nami milavar. Well, we're concerned that if Shimon makes the arch on the inside, then Reuven might say, okay, I'll just make an arch also on the other side towards mine, and I'll claim that half of that I also contributed to the wall and half of it's mine. So therefore, Rav Amar Didi Vididehu, we're concerned that Reuven's going to claim that that the wall belongs to both of them. So therefore, by making the arch on the inside of the wall, Reuven, by making the wall on the outside, by making the arch on the outside of the wall closer to Reuven's, it's kind of an indication that this arch was made by, this wall was made by Shimon. But shouldn't we be concerned that Reuven's gonna remove this arch? If we're talking about building this arch on Reuven's side of the wall, can't Reuven just cut it down? Gizuza Meida Yedia. Well, you would see that, or you could tell that it would have been, if he cuts it down, you'd be able to tell, and therefore that wouldn't work. Those who say Rafuna says Rafuna Michpa lekarno milegov, that the arch is actually on the inside of the wall towards Shimon's property. Why don't you make it on the outside of the wall towards Reuven's property? Guy is lechavi, because Reuven will cut it down. And he'll say that the wall belongs to both of them. But shouldn't we be concerned though that if Shimon makes the arch on the inside of the wall towards his own property, Reuven will simply add his own arch to his side of the wall and say that they jointly own the wall? Lipufa made the idea. Well, if he does that, if he adds it onto the wall, you'll be able to tell that it was added onto the wall later. The problem with saying though that Shimon makes the arch on the inside of the wall towards his own property is that the Mishnah Dafka said that the chosses is mi bachutz. Kasha, it's taka a good kasha. Rav Yochanan Omar says, Rav Yochanan nish'aye be'amsa mi levar. So Rabbi Yochanan says that what you do is not make an arch on the outside, but you put like plaster or something, an amma on the outside of the wall, on like Reuven's side of the wall. V'ni'avid milagav, why not make it on the inside? Ovid chave milavav amadidi v'dideu. Well, if he makes this on this like plaster or something on his side of the wall, well then Reuven will make it on his side of the wall, and he'll say that and he'll say that he also owns the wall. If that's the case, but if Shimon makes it this plaster thing on the outside of the wall, shouldn't we be concerned that Reuven will just peel it off? That it's both of us, ours. If he peels it off, you'll be able to tell that it was peeled off. Hutza, when it comes to a wall that's made from like palm fronds, Omer Rav Nachman says, Rav Nachman sinufe yireche milavar. So you kind of like, have like the pokey ends of it on the outside of the wall to indicate that Shimon built it. V'ni'avi milagov, why not make it on the inside of it? Nami chavi milavar v'amudidi v'dideu. Well, then we're concerned that Reuven would also make these pokey things on the outside and say that he also owns the wall. Yachi, if that's the case, hashta nami guy is ushdi lay, but then shouldn't we be concerned that if Shimon makes these pokey things on the outside, Reuven will just cut them off and say that the wall is jointly owned? Mashrik lay tina, well, Shimon will put like mud around it, and hashta nami osichave v'kolif lay. Yeah, but then should we be concerned that Reuven will come and peel off the dirt? Kilufe made the idea. Well, you would be able to tell if it was peeled off. Abaye Omer says, Abaye hutza leis letakanta lebishtar. Abaye says that when it comes to these palm frond wall thingies where Shimon makes it on his own property, really the only way to protect Shimon's interests here would be to make a document with witnesses. All right. Avalim also midas shneim. But if they, on the other hand, both agreed to make a wall, well then they would split the wall and they would make a sign on both sides of the wall. I don't understand why, if they both agreed to make this wall, do they now have to put this chazis on both sides of the wall? Why not just not have a chazis at all? They both own the wall. Well, it's talking about where one of them put this sign on the wall, so the other one had to do it too to show that he also has ownership in the wall. Ve'ilo avid chaver amididei hu, and if he doesn't make it, so then the other guy is going to say that he owns the whole wall. V'tana takanta l'ramoy komash malon. But in fact, the Gemara, I don't understand. We're saying that we are saying right, exactly. So the Gemara has a kasha, right? I don't understand. Meaning the Mishnah is saying that if they both agree to make this wall in the valley, so then they share the wall and they put a sign on both sides. We say, well, why do you need the signs at all if it's jointly owned? They say, well, it's talking about a situation where one of them was, trying to be a jerk and like putting up a sign to make it seem like it belongs to him, so therefore the other one's also putting up a sign. But what, the Mishnah is going out of its way to teach us like a jerk move? So Amalei Viresha Lavta Kanto Ramayu, but isn't the previous example also talking about a scenario of, aren't we concerned about a jerk, right? Meaning we're saying in the other one that in the previous case that Shimon Dafka makes the arch on Ruvain's side of the wall, because we're concerned that if he makes it on his own side of the wall, then Ruvain's also going to put one on his side of the wall and claim that it's jointly owned. So we're concerned about being a jerk over there as well. Amalei, to which I think it was Rav Ashi responds, Bishlam or Reisha, I understand in the first case, Tana Dino, Mushum Dino Tana Takanta. In the first case, there was actually a real halacha that needed to be taught. The halacha being that Shimon, that if Shimon wants to make a wall in a valley and Reuven doesn't want to, Shimon can't force Reuven to make that wall. That's the important halacha. And then we say, okay, and when he makes that wall, make a sign. So Kilu, yeah, sure, we're concerned about a jerk, but that's not our primary concern. Our primary concern is the halacha that Shimon can't force Reuven to make that wall. Once already, we're talking about how to construct the wall, so we could talk about what if Reuven's a jerk. Ela Seifa, Dino Katoni, the Katoni Takanto, but in the Seifa, we're not teaching any halacha. We're talking about if they both want to build a wall, they build a wall, that's obvious. And now what's the chiddush over here at that, right, that if Reuven's a jerk, then Shimon has to, act in kind to prevent Reuven from being a jerk? So where am I? Dina Ella Seifa Dina Katoni Dekani Dekanto Omar Ravina, rather says, so it says Ravina Acha Behutze Askinon. So here we're talking about like this reed wall. It's talking about davka, a wall made out of reeds. Now Abaye had said that a wall made out of reeds, you have to davka make a contract. There's no way to make some kind of a sign. But what we want to argue from the Seifa is actually what the Mishnah is saying is that really the Mishnah had nothing to teach other than the fact that dafka you can make a sign on reed walls. And yeah, in this case you don't necessarily need to because they both agreed to make the wall, but the point being is that there is a way to make a sign on a wall of reeds and you don't have to rely only on a document, which is what Abaye had argued. So I guess it kind of is a question on Abaye. Okay, that got pretty technical there at the end. Now we get to an interesting Mishnah that we have seen before. I believe we saw it in the context of the sugya of Neil's sugya of Zenene Vizelo Chaser, and Neil, you're stuck with that sugya. It's like I found a sugya that you like, so now every time it comes up, it's your sugya. So anyways, but anyway, it's an interesting Gemara, and this is going to take us to the end of the daf. Again, we're going to get about halfway through Daf Amud Aleph. We keep, I think basically this is the third daf of BavaBasra. I think every single daf so far we've made a nice dent into the upcoming days daf. Okay, so now this is talking interesting Mishnah. All right, we said that who's Reuven and who's Shimon. Okay, Reuven I think is Reuven, and Shimon I think is going to be Shimon. All right. Yeah, Reuven is going to be Reuven, and I think Shimon's going to be Shimon. Yeah, I think that's good. All right. So it says the Mishnah, Hamakiv es chaveru misholish ruchosav v'gader es harishona v'es hashniya v'es hashlishis ein mechayvin oso Rabbi Yossi Omer im omad v'gader es haravis megalgalin olav es hakol. What a gewaldige Mishnah. The scenario is where Reuven has a field and it's surrounded on three sides by Shimon's fields. Shimon puts up fences around his fields, or more significantly for our Mishnah, around Ruvain's field. So now, so Ruvain's field is surrounded on 3 sides by Shimon's fields. Shimon had put up a fence on each of those 3 sides, so meaning Be'etzem, Ruvain's field is now fenced in on 3 sides by Shimon's fences. But 3 sides is not a full enclosure. So ultimately it's not going to keep anything out, really, because they can get in through the 4th side. So says the Mishnah, Amakiv, from the beginning, Amakiv es Chavero Misholosh Ruchosov, if Shimon fences in Ruvain's field from 3 directions, V'godar Sarishona v'Sashnir v'Sashlishis. Oh no, I think probably better translation is Hamakiv es Chavero Misholosh Ruchosov, that if Shimon's fields surround Ruvain's field on 3 from 3 sides, V'godar Sarishona v'Sashnir v'Sashlishis, and Shimon fenced in Ruvain on those 3 sides. Ein mechayvin oso, we are not mechayev Ruvain. Yeah, I don't think that. Yeah. Definitely Ruvain. Yeah, I'm just trying to think. There's going to be a lot of scenarios in this daf. I just want to go over. Yeah, okay. I don't think. Yeah. Mechayvin oso. Ein mechayvin oso Ruvain. Right? Since Ruvain's field is ultimately not completely protected, so Ruvain does not need to contribute to any of Shimon's expense. Ruvain's field now enjoys being fenced in on 3 sides. Right? He's now got a fence around his field, but he doesn't need to pay back Shimon for any of Shimon's expense, because at the end of the day, it's not actually a protection, because it's still open wide open on the 4th side. So Reuven doesn't have to contribute to any of Shimon's expense. Okay, what now? The Gemara is going to kind of read between the lines, implying that what if Shimon fenced him in on 4 sides? Maybe that would be a different story. Rav Yossi Omer says, Rav Yossi, Im Omad v'Goder Sarvis, if he got up and fenced in the 4th side. Now the question is, who got up? Ruvain then said, okay, you know what, I'm going to fence in the 4th one for a complete security. Maybe Shimon said, you know what, I'm going to do the 4th one also. It's not clear who exactly is building the fourth side. Migaglin all of us akol, we make him pay all of it. So there's a lot that needs to be explained over here, but the basic premise is that we're talking about Ruvain's field is surrounded on 3 sides by Shimon's fields. Shimon fences him in on 3 sides. If he's only fenced in on 3 sides, well then Ruvain doesn't have to contribute to Shimon's expenses. What happens if he gets fenced in on that 4th side? Maybe it depends who fenced him in on the 4th side. What exactly is the difference between the Tanna Kama and Rabbi Yossi? What's Rabbi Yossi saying when he says Megadlin Olav Sakol? These are the questions that are gonna come up. And they're gonna come up right now. Basically for the rest of the daf. It's going to be very, very interesting, I think. Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel, says the Gemara, says Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel, Alocha Rabbi Yossi, that the Alocha is like Rabbi Yossi, the Amar who says, Im Omad v'Goder Servius, that if he got up and he closed off the field, he put up a 4th fence, Migalglin Olav Es HaKol, we make Ruvain pay for all of it. Loshna Amad Nikov, Loshna Amad Makif. It doesn't matter if it's Ruvain who built that 4th fence, or if Shimon built that 4th fence. It doesn't matter who built it; he has to pay a kol. But we still don't exactly know what a kol is. Let's go weiter for a second. Amar Rav Huna, here's the machlokes. Amar Rav Huna says Rav Huna. Itmar Rav Huna, Amar says Rav Huna. Hakol lefi ma shegader chiyah barav Amar hakol lefi dmei konim bizol. So when in our Mishnah, Rabbi Yossi had said im Amar v'gader servias megaglin all of es hakol. So Ruvain has to pay for all of it. What does it mean? Obviously, he's not paying for all of it, meaning he's splitting it with Shimon. The question is, what does hakol mean? So Rav Huna says what hakol means is that Ruvain needs to pay Shimon half of Shimon's expense. Meaning, if Shimon went with the top line fencing, which is much more expensive than the basic fencing, so says Rav Huna that Ruvain splits Shimon's expense. If Shimon bought the top line fences, Ruvain pays for half of the price of what Shimon spent in the top line fencing. Whereas Chia Barav says no. Ruvain needs to split the expense, but only what a basic fence would cost. If Shimon wanted to splurge and buy top line, okay, that's his business. But says Chia Barav, Ruvain only needs to pay half the expense of what it would cost to put up a basic fence. Interesting, my brain's getting a shtickle mush. Okay, look, it is a daf that requires a little bit of thought, but I wouldn't think that this would turn my brain to mush. But there is a lot of details here. There is like moving pieces over here. But all right, Chevra, Baruch Hashem, already we're in BavaBasra now. We've learned Bava Kama, we've learned Bava Metzia. My brain was already pushing through the mushing back in from Bava Kama already. We pushed through the mush. So Bava Metzia, forget about it. We pushed through the mush like crazy. So I've got this muscle, So okay, my brain is getting a little mushy, but we pushed through the mush. All right. So when we're talking about Rabbi Yossi, we say Megadlin Olav Hakol. Okay, so the question is, for example, Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel had said that whether Reuven builds the fourth wall, whether Shimon builds that fourth wall, Reuven needs to Megadlin Olav Hakol. And the shayla is, what does it mean Hakol? So Rav Huna says Hakol means that Reuven has to pay whatever Shimon for half of his expenses, whatever they were on whatever top line stuff he wanted to build. Reuven reimburses Shimon for half his expenses. Chia Barav says that no, Reuven is only responsible for a basic fence, and he pays half of the expense. He splits the cost of what a basic fence would cost. Okay. Itmar. Okay, let's read that again. Itmar Rav Huna Amar says Rav Huna kol lefima shegadar. So Rav Huna says that Reuven pays Shimon. He splits the expense with Shimon, whatever Shimon spent on the fence, even if it was top line. Chia Barav Amar says Chia Barav akol lefi dmei konim bizol, based on sort of cheap reeds. Your kind of baseline entry level fence. He pays half of that expense. Tanan, we learned in our Mishnah, hamakif es chavero misholish ruchosov, that if Shimon surrounds Reuven's fields on three sides, v'gadar es harishon v'es hashni v'es hashlishis, and Shimon surrounded, enclosed Reuven's field on three sides with fences. Right, Shimon enclosed Reuven's field on three sides with fences. Ein mechayvin oso. Reuven doesn't need to pay back Shimon anything because his field is not closed. But the diuk being harivius. But if Shimon would have infenced Reuven's field on all four sides, mechayvin also, well then Reuven would have to split the expense with Shimon because now he's getting the benefit of an enclosed field. Ema seifa, but then it says, Rabbi Yossi Omer says Rabbi Yossi, Omad v'goder esaravius. So we want to assume what this means right now is that if Shimon built the fourth wall, Migadlin olav es hakol, so then Reuven needs to pay for all of it. So what's the difference then between Rabbi Yossi and the Tanna Kama? It sounds like they're both saying the same thing, that if Shimon surrounds Reuven's fields on all four sides with fences, so Reuven is now getting benefit from having a closed off field, and he needs to split the expense with Shimon. What's the difference between the Tanna Kama and Rabbi Yossi? So Bishlam Rav Huna, so I understand according to Rav Huna, who says that according to Rabbi Yossi, Reuven has to pay Shimon half of whatever Shimon paid, even if it was top line. Okay, so that's the difference between the Tanna Kama and Rabbi Yossi. So Bishlam Rav Huna, I understand according to Rav Huna, the Amar Hakol lefi ma shegadar ba, that Reuven pays Shimon. That according to Rabbi Yossi, Reuven pays Shimon whatever Shimon paid, half of whatever Shimon paid, however expensive it was. So Haynu Dika ben Tanna Kama of Rabbi Yossi. Okay, I can now explain a difference between the Tanna Kama and Rabbi Yossi. Tanna Kama sover hakol lefi dmei konim bizol in umashagodar lo, that the Tanna Kama says that Reuven pays Shimon that when Shimon fences Reuven's field on all four sides, Reuven pays Shimon the price of a cheap fence. Rabbi Yossi says, I call it Fimasha Gadar, that Reuven has to pay Shimon whatever Shimon paid, even if it was top line. But according to Chiyah Barab, but according to Chiyah Barab, who says that when Rabbi Yossi says that we're saying that Reuven pays Hakol, it means the price of a cheap fence, well then Ma'ika ben Tanakam and Rabbi Yossi. Well then what's the difference between the Tanakam and Rabbi Yossi? They both are saying that if Shimon built fences on all four sides of Reuven's fields, Reuven would have to split the expense with Shimon. And if we're saying that Rabbi Yossi says that we're talking about the price of a cheap fence, then what's the Tanakama saying? He's also saying that Reuven would have to pay. Well, what's he paying? And how is that different from what Rabbi Yossi is saying? Ben Tanakama, so Ma'ika ben Tanakama Rabbi Yossi, Id meikonim bizol, lo kayoivle, my kayoivle. If we're saying that, if according to Rabbi Yossi, Reuven is paying half the price of cheap fencing, well then, if according to Tanakama, that's not what he's paying, well then what is he paying? So Iba says, so we're going to give four possibilities for what Reuven is paying Shimon. Iba Sema Agri Nitira Ika Benayu. You could say that according to Tanakama, Reuven is paying Shimon only up to the price of a watchman. So this is interesting. So if you think about it, at least it's the way I'm understanding it. If you think about it, say you're a farmer. Technically, if you're going to have a watchman to make sure that nobody's going to come and steal your crop, let's say it's a wheat crop. So you don't need a watchman all summer because you've already harvested it, so there's no wheat to watch. You also don't need it in the winter while it's growing, because who's going to steal a stalk of wheat that isn't fully grown? Like, what are you going to do with it? Like, what's the point of stealing it? It's not ready to be eaten. What are you going to do with it? You can't eat it. You can't sell it. What are you going to do with it? So really, the only time when it's crucial to have somebody watching that field is when the wheat is ready, is kind of edible and ready to be harvested, but is not yet harvested. So that's not for, I guess that's not really a very humongous amount of time. And therefore, the expense of paying a watchman is actually less expensive than paying to fence in your entire field. So therefore, so one suggestion is that according to Chiyah Barab, Rabbi Yossi is saying that Reuven needs to split the expense with Shimon of fencing in his field, but only the price of a cheap fence. The Tanakama says no, actually only needs to pay up to the value, he only needs to pay the value of a watchman, which is less than the value of a cheap fence. So Tanakama sover agra netira in d'meikonim bezolo. The Tanakama says that Reuven needs to pay Shimon the value, or it's split with Shimon the value of a cheap fence, the cost of a cheap fence. No, I'm sorry, what? No, the Tanakama says that Reuven needs to pay Shimon the value of a watchman, which is less than the value of a cheap fence. Rabbi Yossi holds d'meikonim bizol, that Reuven needs to pay Shimon the split with Shimon the price of a cheap fence. Alternatively, Rishona Shnia V'Shlishis Ika Benayu. Alternatively, you could say that the nafkamina between the Tanakama and Rabbi Yossi are, does Reuven also need to pay for the expense of fences 1, 2, and 3? Right? Rabbi Yossi says, Reuven needs to pay for all of them. So you could say that, okay, if Shimon only put up fences 1, 2, and 3, and that was it, so then Reuven doesn't need to pay him anything. The Tanakama would say that if Shimon puts up a fourth fence, well then Reuven at least needs to split the expense of the fourth fence, because that is the fence that's then up 1, 2, and 3. He didn't have to pay for it because they didn't actually, provide protection because it was open on the fourth side. It was really only the fourth one, right, that sealed the deal. So Reuven needs to split the expense of the fourth fence, whereas Reuven needs to split the expense of the fourth fence. Whereas Rabbi Yossi would say, that no, once Shimon encloses the fourth fence, well then Reuven now needs to split the expense of all four fences. But still, Chia Barav would say that we are only talking about the value of an inexpensive fence. But the Tanna Kama would say just that fourth fence, whereas Rabbi Yossi would say all four fences. Right, so Tanna Kama holds Revius who diyoiv lei, that Reuven would only pay Shimon for that fourth fence. Aval Rishon Shniya v'Shlishis lo yoiv lei, but Reuven would not have to pay Shimon for the first, second, and third fences. Rabbi Yossi Sovar, whereas Rabbi Yossi holds Rishona Shniya v'Shlishis nami yoiv lei, that Reuven would also split the expense of the first three fences as well. And that's what he was megalgal all of us, akol, all of it. Ibai Sema, option number 3 is Makif Vinika Vika Binayu. Alternatively, you could say that the difference between Tanna Kama and Rabbi Yossi is who's building that fourth fence. Up until now, I've been assuming that Shimon's building all the fences. Maybe what it's saying is that Shimon built fences 1, 2, and 3, and then Reuven says, Givaldig, 3/4 of my field is already enclosed. I'll build the fourth wall, and it'll be Givaldig. So the Tanna Kama sover Taima di Omad Nikof di Migalglin Olav Esakol Aval Omad Makif Eino Nosein Lo Elod Meravius Rabbi Yossi sover Loshna Nikof Loshna Makif Omad Vigod Migalglin Esakol. So according to Tanna Kama, there's a difference between who built that fourth wall. If Reuven built that fourth wall, so then Reuven would have to pay the expense for all four fences. But if Shimon built that fourth fence, so then Reuven would only have to pay the value, right? Split the value of that fourth fence. Whereas Rabbi Yossi says that regardless of who builds that fourth fence, you have to pay for all four walls. Again, let's read it again. So that the difference between the Tanna Kama and Rabbi Yossi is who built that fourth fence. The Tanna Kama says it depends who built that fourth fence. Taima de Omad Nikov de Megaglin Olav Esakol. That the Tanna Kama says, look, if Reuven says, wow, this is amazing. Shimon built me 3 fences already. Let me just build a 4th fence and seal the deal. Well, if Reuven's taking the initiative to get benefit from Shimon's 3 fences, well then he's going to have to contribute to those 3 fences, and he's going to split all 4 fences. Aval Amad Makif, but if Shimon did it all without, Reuven doing anything, and Shimon just built fencing for Reuven's field, so Reuven didn't do anything. He didn't make any indication that, oh yeah, wow, this is great. I want to be part of this. Look, he's getting the benefit, but he didn't take the initiative. So look, so it's the 4th fence that really seals the deal and encloses his field. So he splits the expense of the 4th fence, but that's it. So if Shimon built all 4 fences, so Reuven would only contribute to the expense of the 4th fence. Rabbi Yossi Sovar, Reuven would contribute to the expense of the 4th fence. Rabbi Yossi Sovar, and Rabbi Yossi says, Loshna Nika v'loshna makim. It doesn't matter who built that 4th fence. Im Omad v'godar, if he got up and built the 4th fence, whether Reuven, whether Shimon, whoever it is that got up and did it, Megaglin all of us akol, Reuven needs to split the expense of all 4 fences. And finally, Lishna Achrina, you could say that actually Rabbi Yossi is taka being lenient and saying that Im Omad v'godar sarvias Megaglin all of us akol, meaning davka if Reuven got up and said, you know what, this is great. Shimon built me 3 fences. I'm going to build a 4th one. So in that case, he's got to build all, pay for all of it. But if he didn't, so then he doesn't have to pay for, if Shimon did everything, so Reuven is off the hook. So again, so Lishna Achrina, Makif v'nika v'ika b'nayu, that yes, the difference between the Tanna Kama in this version as well, the 4th version as well, the difference between Tanna Kama and Rabbi Yossi is who built it. Tanna Kama says, Im Godar Makif es Aravias. What? Im Godar Makif es Aravias. Nami. Wait, where am I? Tanna Kama says, Im Godar Makif es Aravias. Nami Yoiv Le. Rabbi Yosef Omar Nikov v'Godar es Aravias. Hu de Yoiv Le. Wait, what? Right, so Tanakama Sovar im Godar Makif is Nam Yoivle, that even if Shimon, right, according to Tanakama, even if it was Shimon who built all 4 walls, Reuven would still have to contribute to the expense. Where am I? Rabbi Yossi says no. Im Amad Nikaf v'Godar Servius Udioivle to Galidaita Denichale. No, Rabbi Yossi is lenient. He says, look, if Reuven builds the 4th fence, well, then he's indicating, wow, this is amazing. I love this. I'm part of this. I'm all about it, and therefore he's got to contribute. Im Godar Makif lo Yoivle Mide. But if Shimon built all 4 walls, I mean that's gewaldig. It's great for Reuven. Great, he has an fenced, an enclosed field. But Reuven didn't do anything. Shimon did all of it. So Reuven doesn't need to contribute because it wasn't his initiative at all. Runya, we saw Runya in Masechta Bava Metzia. He was like that guy who would develop a vineyard, and then he made a loss one year. Anyways, Runya Akpe Ravina Me'arba Ruchosav. So Ravina surrounded Runya's field by all 4 sides. Amale Avli Kama Digadri. So he says to Runya, split the expense with me. I fenced your field on all 4 sides. Luyoiv lay, and Runya did not want to pay Ravina. Havli lifi konim bezol. So Ravina says, well, at least pay me the value of a cheap fence. Lo yoiv lay. Runya was not interested. Havli agunetirusa. At least pay me what it would cost to pay a watchman, right? Even less money. Lo yoivle, and Runya wasn't willing to pay that either. Yom echad ava kogodar dikle, and then one day Runya was harvesting his dates. Amar le'arise, so Ravina says to his sharecropper, Zil shkol mine kibura de'ahine, go and take from Runya a cluster of dates. So the sharecropper went to take a cluster of dates from Runya. Rama Bekala. And Runya got upset and he said, what are you doing? Hey, you're taking my dates. So Omarle, so Ravina says, so you have revealed that you actually do appreciate protection and you don't want people or animals or anything to be taking your dates. So you do appreciate that there are fences around your field clearly. Lo ye elo iza ba'alma. What if it was just a goat that came to take your dates? Milo boy nitirusa. Wouldn't you have to protect your field from goats wandering in and taking your what you're growing? You could skip the word lav lachluye boya. Yeah, but a goat, I would just yell at it and it would run away. Yeah, but don't you need somebody, at least a watchman, somebody to yell at the goat to go away? So clearly, you do appreciate protection for your field. Also, they came to Rava, Amalei, and Rava says to Runya, Zil paise b'mayde ipayis. So Rava says to Runya, look, Ravina is giving you an offering, being very generous. He's offering you a good deal. He's saying, look, I built you a fence. You clearly appreciate having the protection, as you protested when my sharecropper went and tried to take some dates, and you didn't want him to do that. So which means that you definitely value protecting your field. And Ravina was generous in saying, look, I built you a fence. All I'm asking for ultimately is the least amount of payment, which is the amount of a watchman. So Rava says, look, either pay what Ravina is willing to accept, which is the amount of a watchman, and if not, to inana loch dina kuravuna liba de Rav Yossi. And if not, I'm going to make you pay like Ravuna, who says that it's whatever Ravina's expense was, and like Rav Yossi, who says hakol, that you'd have to pay everything based on the whatever Ravina's expense was. So says Rava, I recommend that you just pay, sort of Ravina is willing to accept just the amount that a watchman would accept. That so just I recommend that you do that. Otherwise, you're going to pay top dollar. Runya Zovan Aro Amitzu de Ravina. Runya purchased land, right, property, next to Ravina. So there was the question. So Ravina l'saluke mishum dina de bar metzur. So Ravina thought that he should kick out Runya because it's halacha of dina de bar metzur that really Ravina should have been consulted first and he wasn't. So therefore he has the right to kick out Runya. Rav Safar Breid the Ravina, but Rav Safar Breid the Ravina says to Ravina, Amir Inche, the people say, Arba litzla, that it costs you 4 for the hide and 4 for the tanner, meaning, it's like these expenses kind of never stop. You have a person, he manages to get himself his hands on a hide that he can make, a shoemaker. A shoemaker is trying to make a living as a shoemaker. The hide costs him 4 zuz. Then he's got to set it to the tanner 4 zuz. Like everywhere he goes, this person's costing money. This person's costing money. He can't eat together a living. Runya was a poor person. He's just trying to, he finally found the field that he can have. And now somebody's saying dina de bar metzora and this and that. So just let him be. Let him try to make a living. Whew, that also wasn't an easy daf. I mean, there's gewaltige dafs, but. All right, at the beginning, so the first part of the Mishnah of the Gemara, we finished the first Mishnah of BavaBasra with the fences in the middle, and in what scenarios do you need a fence, and what scenarios don't you need a fence? Hezekri Shmei Hezek, Hezekri Leushmei Hezek, valley, garden, the chotzer, all that kind of stuff. And then we got this interesting Mishnah about a field that's surrounded on 3 sides, and then it gets enclosed on the 4th side. Does Ruvain, who's benefiting from this enclosure, have to pay? Does he not have to pay? Machlokas Tanakam and Reb Yossi, Machlokas Ravuna and Rechia Barab. What exactly is he responsible for? What is he not responsible for? What scenarios? So it's a very interesting daf. Daf Daled Masechta BavaBasra. Hope you enjoy. Peace out.